The main action unfolds around a trial in which the main characters find themselves drawn into a confusing and tense situation that challenges their moral and ethical principles. It all begins when a crime occurs in a small town in Illinois. A young priest named Edward finds himself involved in this horrific crime. He is found at the scene of the crime, surrounded by the bodies of his victims, and is the only suspect. Edward, clearly shocked and frightened, claims he has no memory of what happened that night, and his speech is full of inconsistencies. When the case comes to light, it causes a wide public outcry and everyone in the town begins to talk about it. In an attempt to get justice for his client, a famous lawyer named Aaron gets involved. Aaron decides to defend Edward, despite all the doubts and fears he has. He realizes that his client has no chance for a normal life if he is convicted for a murder he may not have committed. During the trial, Aaron tries to make sense of Edward's personal life, his past, and the reasons that may have led to such a terrible incident. Edward talks about how he was abused as a child, how he was a victim of abuse, and how it left deep scars on his soul. Aaron begins to realize that Edward is not just a criminal, but a man who has experienced real suffering and is now trying to survive in a world that leaves him no chance of recovery. Gradually, the lawyer immerses himself in Edward's world, meeting people who knew him and gathering evidence that could help him in court. Aaron faces difficulties as Edward becomes more and more entangled in his memories and his behavior becomes increasingly strange and unpredictable. He begins to question what really happened that night, and it causes him confusion and fear. Meanwhile, unexpected evidence begins to surface in court that casts doubt on Edward's version of events. Evidence emerges that suggests that Edward may not have been the only culprit. Aaron realizes that this case involves not only his client and victims, but also a system that may be corrupt. He begins working with a detective who is also committed to uncovering the truth and helps Aaron in his quest. Together they begin to uncover the dark secrets surrounding the case, which leads them to a new suspect who may be involved. However, as the investigation progresses, it becomes apparent that Edward is not as simple as he seems. He begins to show signs of manipulation and his stories become more and more convoluted. Aaron senses that there is more to this case than just madness. He continues to dig deeper to figure out who Edward really is and what his past is hiding. Things escalate in the final act of the movie. Edward calls several witnesses to the trial who can corroborate his words. However, when they start talking, it turns out that their testimonies are completely at odds with what Edward claims. The trial becomes even more tense when the opposing lawyer tries to impose his interpretation of the events. The courtroom becomes a real battle for the truth, with both sides trying to prove their case. Aaron realizes that Edward may not be who he says he is and begins to question his own actions. He sees that Edward is capable of manipulation and can play on the feelings of others. Aaron decides to conduct his own investigation to find out what really happened. He meets people who can help him understand Edward's dark secrets and gradually begins to put the pieces of the puzzle together. More and more clues are pointing to the fact that Edward may have been involved in bigger crimes than just that. Aaron feels that he is close to uncovering the truth, but Edward becomes increasingly closed off and adamant. He refuses to share information and begins to threaten Aaron, trying to get him to drop the case. Aaron realizes that his life is in danger and he must be careful in his actions. The final scene of the movie takes place in court, where Edward finally confesses to his crimes. He begins to tell his story, which turns out to be even more confusing and dark than expected. His confessions shock everyone present, and Aaron realizes that Edward is actually a manipulator, using his victim to hide his true intentions. This revelation leads to Edward eventually being put on trial for his actions, and Aaron realizes that he is actually trapped by his client who has been using him to achieve his goals. Aaron leaves the courtroom realizing that the truth may be far more complicated than he thought, and that the world is full of secret passions and unsolvable mysteries. Edward remains in the shadows, and Aaron realizes that he has only begun to realize how complex and confusing the concept of justice can be.